So, kind of thing about it is that I'm pretty sure we're almost nearly at the end of Silver's story before we move on to the grand finale.
Hey! What are you doing? You've got to leave!
I have my duty. This living flame has been entrusted to the royal family. The flames of disaster will awaken if nothing is done. That must not happen. Eternal Sun, the living flame that has been entrusted to the royal family. Fall into slumber with a royal soul. I'm sorry, but can you take her to a safe place? That's a good girl, Elise. Remember, be brave. Don't cry, no matter what happens. Otherwise, your tears will call forth the flames inside you. Become a strong queen who doesn't cry no matter what happens. And live happily.
Now, unlike the Xbox 360 version, for some reason, on the beginning portion of that cutscene we saw earlier, the lighting effects has been removed on the Xbox 360 version.
Did you do it?
Yes. And you?
Yes. The flames are properly sealed. It's done. You're going to leave it behind?
Yes. I already know what becomes of it in the future. It's time to return.
Yes, of course. Chaos Control! It's a lucky charm.
So Silver just somehow gives the Chaos Emeralds to Princess Elise, thinking it's a lucky charm, which explains how Princess Elise had the Blue Emerald in the beginning of the game in the first place. Now, do you guys even remember back in Shadow Story that I've mentioned that word called the Tentacle Hiccup there? Well, we got to look back on the similar cutscene as in Silver's story, except the fact that if you look closely right here, that's why I paused the footage right there, basically Silver still has the blue Chaos Emerald stuck in his hand. So, as you can tell, that's another Tentacle Hiccup there, at least in Shadow Story, so, oops.
Blaze,
What did you see?
the Iblis trigger wasn't Sonic the Hedgehog.
I see.
I can't believe it. Do you think she's in danger?
They're quite noisy.
I never saw something like
Yes, I heard that the princess here left for Dr. Eggman's base in response to his earlier threat.
What if his ultimate objective was to release Iblis?
And so, we've gone back into Soliana once again. Hey, what is up ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only, Maxi here once again, and I am back for the likes of the Maxi Toys videos once again. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of Let's Play of Sonic the Hedgehog, or most people call it Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, for the Xbox 360 / PlayStation 3, while we're still able to experiencing Silver's story campaign. So, last time, we've essentially did manage to able to deal with the forms of the next boss in Silver's story, which appears to be the Egg Genesis, and that was actually alright, despite the fact that the camera just sometimes messes me up. But regardless of everything else though, is about the fact that we did accomplish that okay enough. And in addition to that, we also did manage to able to went into Radical Train to able to catch up with Sonic. And on top of that, we also managed to deal with this another character battle, like we did somehow beat the likes out of Shadow the Hedgehog. And in addition to that, much like in Shadow Story, we somehow traveled into 10 years ago, into the past, in journey forms of Aquatic Base, but except the fact that we have to chase after Iblis instead of Mephiles. So, yeah, I guess it's that. So today for this video, as you can definitely tell, is about the fact that we are now going back into Soliana, because, as you can tell, we have to deal with this particular mission, by the way, which appears to be by the forms of Protect Anna, because she knows the secret. So because of that though, because this particular town mission is mandatory if you want to progress, and whenever I got to this point, specifically on the PlayStation 3 version, for the love of God, this is the reason why it took so long to able to get this part going. Because no matter what though, there is this very annoying moment whenever I do some previous recording attempts during the forms of this mission right here, which obviously you still have to deal with more enemies on screen. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that the more you're trying to deal with some more enemies into this particular mission, obviously as you can tell, Anna will get some progression. However, here's the catch to this though, is that you have to deal with all these enemies as quickly as possible, because no matter what though, I swear the rubber banding AI, or the AI where it comes to the forms of the actual one of those townspeoples, well, to be more specifically Anna in some cases though, she just sometimes gets a bit freaked out, which as a result, that has never happened to me before. Like, I know for the fact that I did manage to test this out on the Xbox 360 version, which that doesn't seem that much of a problem, mind you. But for whatever reason, on the PlayStation 3 version, the current version I'm playing through right now, for whatever reason, the AI just sometimes gets all a little bit glitchy and stuff like that. Which, true, because obviously this game is unpolished as it is, so... Because, you know, there are some glitches, technical hiccups, and you name the rest. Although, the only polished part about the game is obviously the music, because obviously the music is the best part about the game for me. Which, then again, we'll talk more about that if we get onto our final thoughts of Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, either on the Xbox 360 or the PlayStation 3. But I must say though, is about the fact that, spoiler alert, do not recommend the PlayStation 3 version just because of this. Frame rate is even worse, and on top of that, there was no way you can able to install the actual patch of the game by simply able to reduce the loading times, and because of that though, I can honestly do say is that the Xbox 360 version is, ironically enough, is an alright version, but still it does have some bit of issues, just like the PlayStation 3 version. So, anywho, so yeah, a few things I want to explain for this point today is that, well, today's date, of course, is the 18th of March today, in some cases in 2024 today. So naturally speaking, it's about the fact that we've only got about 4 more days to go until Princess Peach Showtime is going to be releasing on the Nintendo Switch. So I'm still very excited to able to check that game out. Well, mind you, that I still managed able to ignore the demo version just because you're only able to experience 2 levels, and of course, I'm probably not going to spoil myself when it comes to seeing the forms of the beginning portion of the game plays out to be. Now, I'm not exactly sure if that particular game will have file save slots, just like what they did for the sake of the forms of not only Mario vs. Donkey Kong Remake, but it's also with the forms of Luigi's Mansion 3, and on top of that with any other games in general, like Pikmin 4, and potentially speaking of Pikmin 4 though, is that I've realized is that just like in Pikmin 4, I believe Princess Peach Showtime only runs at 30 FPS instead of 60 frames per second. So because of that though, whilst unlike in Yoshi's Crafted World, that normally on the menu navigation, that it only runs at the same applies with the forms of the world map screens and stuff like that. Usually in the world map screens only runs at 30 FPS, whilst compared to during the forms of the actual gameplay, naturally runs at 60 frames per second. So I can honestly have no idea why that the frame rate decides to able to filter a little bit differently. Well, depending on the forms of certain situations that's been going on, or just anything else in general. So anyway, so as you can tell, we somehow managed able to complete that particular town mission by simply protect Anna, and as a result, we somehow made our way back to the forms of the forest section in Soliana. And if I was assuming correctly though, it's about the fact that much like in Sonic's story, is that I'm pretty sure we have to take care of the forms of the 3 trials of Soliana. Except the fact that notable differences this time around though, is that the actual specific challenges are completely different. So, yeah, naturally speaking, it's about the fact that we can easily manage able to take care of those missions okay enough. Well, there's only one in particular mission that gives a lot of players a lot of trouble with, which we'll explain more details about that if we somehow slowly walking towards the actual trials of Soliana to begin with. Although, generally speaking, it's about the fact that, well, I will admit it though right away, it's been about 3 days ago since I actually have last played this game for sure, mainly because, well, so far anyway though, I'm almost preparing to able to actually give Princess Peach Showtime a shot, specifically for the Nintendo Switch, once that game comes out. So generally speaking though, yeah, nothing else to say about that, I guess. So anyway, so we have the first test right here, which appears to be the test of friendship, where I believe between this, alongside with the forms of the third and final mission that I'm pursuing to, we have to deal with a lot of enemies. Although, thankfully, unlike the ones of how it does it for Test of Courage in Sonic's story, where basically though we do have rings this time around. So at the very least, we able to actually have that. So anyways, one on the subject for this point though is about the fact that there are quite a few things I would like to mention. Perfect opportunity as well, since that we are still going to be playing through Sonic the Hedgehog, or Sonic 06, for those of you most people call it that, is that recently, Sonic the Hedgehog 3, the movie, has recently wrapped up filming. So because of that though, that pretty much takes care of the forms of the first act, during the forms of the actual productions, all that stuff. So, I suppose all they need to do is left now is, of course, during the forms of the editing department, ranging from not only for its voice acting, for the likes of specific characters, and on top of that, CG working, or specifically working on CGI, and also anything else to be more specifically, which I couldn't think about on top of my head, but I'm still pretty excited for it. So naturally speaking though, is about the fact that we've almost at, let's just say, that we've almost at the forms of 9 months away for the likes of the forms of the third Sonic the Hedgehog movie will be releasing during that time. So I'm still very excited for it, and I'm sure a lot of Sonic fans will also going to be excited for it as well. So potentially speaking of, that's going to be pretty entertaining once that particular film comes out. Oh, and speaking of film style, is about the fact that I've noticed that already, that recently Inside Out 2 is also getting ourselves with the forms of some new things that's been going on. Like, for instance, we've got ourselves some first individual posters has been revealed for Inside Out 2. To be more specifically, showing us joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust, if I'm assuming so anyway. Well, alongside with those the usual 5 characters, they also brings us some more individual posters for new emotions as well. So, yeah, you probably get the idea for that point. So, yeah, that basically takes care of the forms of the first test, where it comes to the forms of the 3 trials of Soliana. So, yeah, it's actually not too shabby, because like I said earlier, we finally managed to have rings to its disposal. So this means no need for frustration to be involved. Although, just like in the test of courage though, is that if you do die at one point without any sort of rings to your hands, obviously though is about the fact that you get kicked out of the mission and you have to sit for a lot of loading screens. So, that's no fun. So anyways, let's move on to the next test, which appears to be buddy forms of the test of memory. Now, as far as I'm aware, is that whenever I first got to this point on the Xbox 360 version, whenever I first played it, basically though, it got me really confused at first. But as the time went on, basically though, I know exactly what to do. And for those of you who have a first time experiencing this mission though, I highly recommend you're able to pay attention to the forms of the gameplay footage itself. Because, you're able to actually go for a set of 3 questions. So, for instance, it's about the fact that if you couldn't be bothered able to talk to that particular guy, basically, this is what you're supposed to do. Go to the right, and then once we get to question 2, actually, to be more accurate though, since we've already done question 1, for question 1, you simply go onto the right portal, and then once we get to question 2, as soon as when this particular thing loads itself, also go to the right. And finally, for question 3, you have to aim for the left, because otherwise, if you try to successfully try to go for that order, without needing to able to be asking for that whatever that person's supposed to be, and that way you should be able to complete that mission no problem. So, however, there are certain other missions I couldn't be bothered to do. Likely, for instance, there is that annoying mission, for Silver anyway, that you have to able to use the psychic powers to pick up apples and place them in barrels or baskets. Well, let me tell you, that mission blows, especially because not only is it incredibly tedious, but it's also incredibly slow and monotonous as well. So generally speaking that's the reason why I've somehow skipped that mission entirely. So, and once you're able to completely done with that particular mission right here, as you saw, you easily get that S rank no problem. But if you get sidetracked on the other hand though, and if you're pretty much wasting your time on that mission, obviously though you get lower rank. So, yeah, it's probably best if you're able to actually just to pay attention like I usually do. So, anyways though, so another thing I want to point out as well is that since no matter what though, as you probably already know, that recently both Sonic the Hedgehog and Angry Birds are both having a collaboration recently. Likely, for instance, is about the fact that they hosted for about 5 games to be more specifically, 3 of them from Angry Birds and 2 of them from Sonic the Hedgehog. So, let's start with Sonic first. Obviously, like we've already established that before, since that technically Starlight Glimmer, she technically already mentions about that ever since in Mario vs. Donkey Kong Remake on the Switch Let's Play. Well, recently, because we've somehow unlocked not only Red, but also Chuck as well. And yeah, both of those characters are pretty much, you know, the movie counterparts, because obviously they do have feet after all. So because of that, so that's how recently I've managed to discover something that obviously every now and then they somehow managed able to change or alternate the names with the different counterparts, not only for Red, but also for Chuck as well. Because technically speaking that wasn't the first time that Sonic and Angry Birds have their collaboration together, because that only goes to back in 2016 sometime, to be more specifically with the collaboration with Angry Birds Epic. Because, you know, that game was used to be the RPG game after all back then. Although I will admit though, back then, I never actually played that game that much, mainly because I was more into playing not only Sonic the Hedgehog, but also Sonic the Hedgehog 2, including Sonic CD as well, made by Christian Whitehead, because obviously playing those 3 games on the iPhone devices is obviously pretty cool in my opinion back then, especially I can play those amazing remasters on the fly, or specifically on the go, potentially speaking of, just before when Sonic Origins exists for multiple platforms, yes, including Nintendo Switch as well. So, anywho though, so yeah, with that being said though, as you can see, we've now on to the 3rd and the final trial when it comes to the 3 trials of Soliana in Silver Story, which appears to be known as the Test of Heart. Where basically, this mission is very similar to the first trial, except this time around though, there aren't any objects we can able to play around with. So because of that though, we have to rely on the forms of this awesome stun attack, and on top of all that stuff though is about the fact that you can't able to actually reflect the actual missiles back at certain robots if you so much more of a desire. But relatively speaking though, it's about the fact that this mission is pretty much a piece of cake, especially noticeable because like in the forms of in the first mission, or specifically the first trial of this particular section, obviously thankfully there are some rings to be found, so generally speaking though, it's nowhere near as frustrating compared to the forms of how it does it in Sonic Story for the sake of the Test of Courage. So anyways, once you dish out as many of those enemies as you could, right there, obviously the 3 trials of Soliana in Silver Story is basically done. Now, what I've noticed something is about the fact that there is technically yet another town mission I could possibly try to show off, which appears to be none other than Sonic Man Returns, where basically though, it plays pretty similar to the forms of in Sonic Story, except the fact that it does manage to take place in a different location. So because of that though, I was originally trying to able to show that off, but unfortunately though, due to time constraints, we got able to proceed into the continuation of the story, unfortunately. Plus, not to mention though, is about the fact that we've already organized trying to able to actually get every single upgrades for Silver as it is. So, anyways, so just like the ones of how it does in Sonic Story though, once you've completed all 3 trials of Soliana, this means we must make our way to the Soliana's old castle. Except, no matter what though, about the fact that we're going to be playing as Silver the Hedgehog this time. So because of that though, something tells me we must make our way to the next stage, which appears to be none other than Kingdom Valley. So of course this will be our 3rd time experiencing Kingdom Valley ever since in Shadow Story, since the beginning portion of the forms of Shadow Story, which seriously, that was incredibly odd if you must say. So anyways, let's meet up with Sonic in Journey forms of in Kingdom Valley. So I'm pretty sure this stage is going to be pretty lengthy as it is, so
You look like you're in a hurry.
So, what's going on?
Circumstances have changed. I need to rescue the princess.
So here we go, on to Kingdom Valley, but this time what appears to be in Silver Story. So as a result, as I said this before, the stage itself is going to be super lengthy as it is. So anyways, let's continue with our discussion about the forms of the Sonic and Angry Birds collaboration. Now, as far as I did say this before, not only does Red and Chuck did somehow became playable in Sonic Dash, which obviously we've already unlocked them both, but also about the fact that both of those characters are also being playable during the forms of in Sonic Forces Speed Battle, and as a result, they did somehow manage to address the forms of specific items they brings us into, likely for instance for Red, that he does have Shockwave alongside with Slingshot Boost, and finally Tricky Towers. And as far as Chuck is concerned, he does have Lightning Bolt, Slingshot Boost, and Tricky Towers. And as far as status, as far as I'm aware, that Red does have 9 out of 10 for speed, 7 out of 10 for acceleration, and 5 out of 10 for strength. So yeah, it's pretty mixed, all things considered. And as far as Chuck goes, that he does have 10 out of 10 for speed, and 5 out of 10 for acceleration. And finally for strength, unfortunately though, he does have 3 out of 10 for strength, which I honestly have no idea why they'd somehow managed to address that. Mind you, it's about the fact that he's the fastest bird of the lineup when it comes to the Angry Birds in mind. So because of that though, yeah, he was basically a speed type when it comes to truck anyway. So, now as far as I'm usually concerned with this particular stuff that I surprisingly forgot to mention about, during the course of it not only on Friday, but usually also say applies with the forms of Starlight Glimmer as well, that she also forgot to mention about within both Saturday and Sunday respectively. And let's not forget ourselves with Coco Bandicoot as well, is that, well, suffice to say, happy 10th anniversary of the game's release of Yoshi's New Island for the Nintendo 3DS. So yeah, better late than never I suppose, especially noticeable because we were trying our best if we were able to describe about the forms of another topics at this point. But yeah, while looking back in Journey forms have been 10 years later syndrome, when it comes to the forms of Yoshi's New Island, it was alright while looking back on it though. I mean, sure, it's not the best game I've ever played. I mean, it is a decent time, I will admit it though right away. Like, I will admit though, the art style is pretty alright. I mean, I honestly do prefer the forms of the actual sketchbook artistic approach, because obviously what makes the good old classic Super Nintendo title Yoshi's Island so great in the first place, not only because of its visual presentation, but it's also about the fact that how indicative the gameplay actually plays out to be. So because of that though, also the music did somehow manage to make things a little bit more enjoyable to listen to during the forms of the good old classic Yoshi's Island. Oh, dang it, I got shot on the back. Oh, I didn't see that coming, but that's okay, because we've already got the checkpoint familiar, so that should be all pretty swell as far as I'm always gonna say for this point. And suffice to say for this point, though, is about the fact that I'm pretty sure this is also the first death in Journey Forms of Silver Story, I'm pretty sure, because no matter what, though, is about the fact that I didn't seem able to take care of that particular enemy from there. Well, mind you, because we somehow run out of rings, so because of that, though, maybe I should just able to actually just be more careful next time. So, but I was really hoping about the fact that we can probably go through a perfect run by simply able to achieve yes rank, but let's just hope we're able to make it happen. So because of that though, despite the fact that getting more rings might be seems worthless now, just because like I've already established that before, we've already got every single upgrades for silver at this rate. So because of that, yeah, there's not much right to hum about. So anyways though, yeah, as I was saying about the fact that when it comes to Yoshi's Island series, is that I think fundamentally speaking though, we will try our best if we're able to actually get around for doing the entire Yoshi's Island games in the future. Well, let's just hope that will make it happen though, which is especially noticeable because until next year, in 2025, that will mark the 30th anniversary of the game's release of Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, which also applies to the forms of Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Conquest, despite the fact that we've already tackled for the Super Nintendo version of Donkey Kong Country 2 back in Journey Forms of in 2020, in some cases the worst year we've ever experienced, so we've already on about that ever since in Journey Forms have been 4 years ago. Well, almost 4 years ago. Which, speaking of which though, is about the fact that once we get to on Wednesday, I can't even believe by saying this, it's been like almost 4 years ago, specifically the UK version as it is that not only is going to be a 4-year anniversary of the game's release of Animal Crossing New Horizons for the Nintendo Switch, but it's also about the fact that we'll also say this right now, unhappy 4th anniversary of this particular whole pandemic situation, specifically the UK version. So, although we'll talk more about that once we get to on Wednesday at some point, so because of that though, it might be a bit too early to say this right now. So because of that though, yeah, I can see why about the fact that the Kingdom Valley is by far the longest stage in the entire game. Not just for the Forms of Sonic story, but also with Shadow story, and even recently in Silver story, which I can definitely tell right from the start though, is that in the first section right here, it's gone by a lot more lengthy as far as I'm aware, so which is pretty surprising all things considered. Well, mind you about the fact that eventually at some point, as soon as we're able to get on to the next segment, then I'm pretty sure we're able to take control of Sonic eventually, which as a result, that you do realize about the fact that Silver no longer believes about the fact that Sonic is no longer an Iblis trigger. So because of that though, yeah, I fully appreciate about the fact that we instantly become friends with Sonic now. So relatively speaking, it's up to Silver and Sonic. We're about to follow the egg carrier. So yeah, just like in Sonic's story, except the fact that, well, there's no Mark Speed section, thankfully. So because of that though, we can just simply go through point A to point B, depending on what section we're able to actually go into. So yeah, it feels like we're actually going to be going into the entire segment in backwards. So that's actually kind of interesting with this particular segment right there, because normally we're about to be going into this forward linear pathway. So as a result, on Silver's story counterparts this time is that in Junie forms within the first segment, is that we're going to traverse into the section backwards. So pretty interesting though. So but anywho though, so as far as I'm aware, when it comes to the forms of those two specific items, as I mentioned this earlier, when it comes to both Red and Chuck, that they both able to actually access to not only Slingshot Boost, but also with Tricky Tires as well. Let's get to the forms of those descriptions with those two items specifically. For Slingshot's Boost, which allows you to able to give you some bit of burst of speed, and basically, according to the forms of the description for it, it did say, pull back, let go, and fly past your rivals with this mad slingshot. And as far as Tricky Towers, as far as I'm concerned, basically though, it did say on the description here, makes your rivals mad with these obstacles and a TNT crate too. I mean, what is this, like they somehow managed to borrow the TNT crate from the likes of Crash Bandicoot, except with the lack of countdown? Well, that's what I was going to be thinking about anyway, so either way. Now, as far as I'm aware, is about the fact that, ensuring at some point, about the fact that you do realize about the fact that eventually at some point, that basically we might be able to actually guarantee to able to get ourselves some even more information recently. Like, for example, is about the fact that I've noticed there was actually the article about the forms of this particular Nintendo Direct that I somehow managed to discover for myself. However though, it's pretty much fake, for I've noticed that already. Like, for example, we've already technically had Super Mario Galaxy, thanks to the forms of the Super Mario 3D All-Stars compilation for its physical version, just because no matter what though, for whatever reason, they somehow managed able to list it, not only Super Mario Galaxy, but also Super Mario Galaxy 2, within a 2 twin combo pack when it comes to the forms of the Super Mario Galaxy games onto the Nintendo Switch. And yeah, I can definitely safely to say it's pretty much fake. Although, the actual release dates for other games are accurate though, like for instance with Luigi's Mansion 2 HD has already been addressed, and same applies with the forms of Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door remake on Switch, that was also been addressed thanks to the forms of the Happy Mario 10 Day, which I can't even believe by saying this, it's been almost like, well, I know for a fact that it's been 8 days ago since we did somehow manage to able to celebrate the Happy Mario 10 Day, so as a result, yeah, it's actually gone way too fast for the sake of convenience as far as I'm aware. So, anyway, there's also another thing I want to address something about this as well, is that they somehow also listed Super Mario Party 2, and I can classify that's also a fake as well, because we have no idea what's going to be up next for Mario Party after Mario Party Superstars since in 2021, so even then though, that could be a possibility when it comes to bringing one last Mario Party game on the Nintendo Switch before they moved on to the next Nintendo system. Well, we shall see what happens, enjoying at some point in either on April or June, depending on the forms of something chaos is about to happen when it comes to, you know, all over the internet, when it comes to rumors and leaks and stuff like that, which then again, I no longer trust rumors and leaks anymore, so, and as you can tell, we've now played as Sonic, which as a result, it is pretty cool that we can able to play as him again, since in by the end of Sonic's story, which as a result, we can able to slow down time with the gems, and on top of that, we can able to instantly try to equip the actual electric shield, although I was expecting to try to utilize with the purple gem, so we can able to see that in action for proper. But let's just say, once we get the forms of the DLC content, obviously we will able to show the entire purple gem off as soon as we can. So because of that though, yeah, I just somehow realized about the fact that we somehow collecting quite a few solely on the medals, for specifically silver medals in mind. And thankfully though, we don't have to rely on the forms of the light speed dash segment on this part right here, so And I've honestly have no idea why that Silver mentions that line twice, or anything else like that, which I honestly have no clue of what the heck is happening right there. So, and also I just realized this place is filled to the brim with a lot of slowdown here and there, which I can totally see why a lot of people seem to play on the Xbox 360 version, not on the PlayStation 3 version, just because the frame rate is even worse. So, now I can also totally see why, according to the forms of Metacritic review scores of between these two versions for the sake of time, the Xbox 360 version receives a bit of a higher score, whilst compared to the PlayStation 3 version receives even lower scores, mainly due to the forms of poor frame rate, and you probably name the rest. So, and yeah, we still have no idea what's going to be up next for Nintendo side of things when it comes to likely for a couple of months' time. And there's also another thing I want to point out as well, is that by that time, once we get to towards the end of March, that basically there is that specific DreamWorks movie. It's going to be celebrating its 15th anniversary at some point by the end of this month, which it appears to be by the forms of Monsters vs. Aliens. So, yeah, I'll discuss more about that once we get the forms of some more recording setup, or recording sessions for that matter, in regards to the forms of Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 in mind. So because of that though, and as it seems, no matter what though, we've almost nearly at the end of the stage, because after all, once we're able to hang on to this particular eagle again, ever since Injuni forms have been solely on the Forest Hub world, and no matter what though, we have to dish out as many of those enemies as we could, because unlike in Sonic's story though, is that once you do manage to take care of a whole bunch of enemies on screen, well, just in case if you really want to rank up some more points, in case of S ranks comes into play. And after that though is about the fact that that pretty much leads us to the last Mark Speed section in Sonic's story, which is by far is the hardest of the bunch. Well, I still, surprisingly enough, managed able to beat that particular Mark Speed section in Sonic's story on my first attempt as well. So generally speaking though, because, you know, ironically enough, I know this game so many times. So, anyway, that basically takes care of the forms of Kingdom Valley in Silver Story. I'm still very surprised about the fact that the first segment of this entire stage is even longer than the forms of how it does it on the second segment, which I'm not exactly sure how do I describe it, but either way, suffice to say for this point guys is that we got the endings of this point right here. So join me next time for more of Let's Play of Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 in Silver Story, is that we was able to finish up everything in Silver Story by not only going into Flame Core, which appears to be the final stage of his story, and of course the final boss in Silver Story as well. So I'll see you guys until on Wednesday. Later fellas.